welcome to Meet Me at the Movies. Noel T. Manning II here, hanging out with Thomas Manning. And today we're going to encourage you to get out your blackboard, your chalk, or maybe even your crayon and some legal paper, because we're going to spend some time in the education world right here on Meet Me at the Movies. We're going to talk about boycotts, bans, and barricades for filmmakers and for films over the years. And here's the simple question, Thomas, a really simple question. If you had the power to decide what films or filmmakers others could or should watch, what would that list look like? Would it be a collection of films that inspire you, that challenge you, maybe reinforce the values that you have? Or, bigger question, how much of that selection will be shaped by personal beliefs, by politics, by culture, identity, religious background? So that's kind of what we're going to dive into today. We're going to look at something that I think is personal. I think we all have our personal choices for what we will watch and what we choose to let others watch when we're around them. And so that's the challenge to our audience. And so we're going to look at some of these filmmakers that may have been deemed dangerous, controversial, or provocative with audiences or the establishment. Thomas, good to see you, man.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be here, and thankful after a few contract negotiations and reworking whether or not I was allowed back on the show. Well, I'm back, and it feels good. Thanks for welcoming me with, mildly open arms, not fully open, but I'm here.
Well, we're glad you did not go into the transfer portal. We're glad that you're still eligible to spend time with us right here on C19 TV's Meet Me at the Movies. So right before I introduced you, I kind of talked about the establishment, and the establishment can mean a lot of things. It can mean political establishment, social or cultural establishments, but there is an establishment that at some point decided, here's how films should be rated, and here's how it should connect with audiences. Talk a little bit about that, if you would. Give a little history, a historical background for this special educational edition of Meet Me at the Movies.
Yeah, so for a little bit of early context, in the 1920s, when Hollywood was just getting started up, that was a time of great revelry, a lot of debauchery in the industry, which, not that that's really changed any at all since then, but it was very prevalent then. And if you saw the Damien Chazelle film Babylon a few years ago, you see that depicted in many graphic ways. And so then in the following decade, you had the establishment of a set of parameters on basically what could or could not be allowed on screen, in major motion pictures. And this was known as the Hays Code. This was enacted in 1934. It was named for William H. Hayes, who at one point was the Postmaster General, and then by this point was the president of the Motion Pictures Producers and Distributors of America. And so this set of guidelines placed restrictions on on certain images on screen, violence and sex, but also profanity. And it was just a very difficult set of guidelines to work within for a lot of filmmakers. But this was not sustainable. The industry was growing every day. Television was expanding. Television was reaching practically every household across the country. And then you also had the foreign film industry that was making its way over to the United States, and they weren't beholden to the same guidelines. They could push boundaries. And then, of course, the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court itself, got involved and had to step into a few cases. So the Hays Code only lasted for a 34-year period from 1934 to 1968. But then the new era that came out of that, you have the creation of the MPAA rating system, which is something that is still used today. And at the time that it was initially established, you had four primary ratings. You had G, PG, R, and X, which I think X was typically reserved for like pornographic material. But in the case of some filmmakers, even violence, even just even if there was no sex on screen, no nudity or anything, the violence was too much for the MPAA. And I think there's a bit of a local connection here, a filmmaker that you know very well, that you've perhaps made a documentary about, someone that I've hung out with a few times, and might be from Shelby, North Carolina. Who is this? Who's this that we're talking about here?
That's right. The living legend, Mr. Earl Owensby, EO to his friends. He definitely took on the MPAA. And the way that happened was he had a film in 1976 called Dark Sunday. And we talked about the establishment. It was the major studios that had the control over what the rating systems were. Earl was challenging that establishment by being an outsider from North Carolina, born in Cliffside, North Carolina, had a studio between Boiling Springs and Shelby, North Carolina, creating films. And he was having some success on the international market. You talked about the international market. He was having success there. And the Hollywood studios were taking notice, as well as the Hollywood press. He was getting his name out there around the world as someone who wasn't afraid to step on toes and to do what he wanted to do and express his own artistic freedom. So the film Dark Sunday was sent to the MPAA. They took a look at it, and they gave it an X rating because of violence. Owensby not really happy about that, and so he took his case to the media, but also took it literally to court and challenged the MPAA and said, look, there's another film that was just released, a lot like our film. It's The Outlaw Josie Wells with the legendary Clint Eastwood. You guys, gave this film a PG rating. A lot of violence in that, a lot of shootouts, people dying. Sure. And Dark Sunday, I've got people dying. I've got people, getting shot out. There's violence. But you compare these two, and they're so similar. And so Earl actually challenged the MPAA, and for the principle of the matter, he said, I want a G rating. I want a G rating. and they ultimately, this did not go to jury. They kind of settled it out of court. The MPAA decided to give it an R rating. Earl decided, I've already proven my point, so I'm going to walk away from this, and I'm going to give it an NR rating, which is a non-rating, which, of course, brought some people in. So it was really interesting that Earl decided to take these people on. The MPAA really feared the negative press. They were getting a lot of negative press already, and the system itself was already getting some scrutiny from a film, another independent film that was released a couple of years earlier that hopefully we'll be able to chance to talk about. And there was also perceived prejudice from the studios that was out there and how they were looking at the independents. So, Owensby was kind of satisfied that he got his court out, basically the court of public opinion. And one of the things that I think Owensby standing up to the Hollywood system here, he made the point that you should not restrict the independent filmmakers. You shouldn't have favoritism for the Hollywood studios. We're all out there, and if we have the ability to create art and to create cinema, you shouldn't hold that against us. He exposed kind of the inconsistencies on how violence was rated by studios, by the MPAA, I should say. He also demonstrated that legal pressure and public scrutiny could also force the MPAA to reconsider. So, Owensby's battle here kind of foreshadowed later criticisms of the MPAA. And there was also a documentary in 2006 called This Film Is Not Yet Rated, that if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check that out. So that's a little bit about kind of Owensby and the legacy that he has and the impact he had on standing up for the independents and also fighting against industry gatekeeping. So I hope that's where you were going with that question, Thomas.
No, I was actually talking about a totally different filmmaker. I don't know where you got EO from, but
well, we know that Earl Owensby's name is one that became legendary, and other filmmakers and studios, of course, and media outlets took notice around the world. 60 Minutes from CBS, legendary 60 Minutes, came here, interviewed Earl, and had a 15-minute feature on Earl. And so there was also this guy that used to work in a video store that ended up becoming a filmmaker that knew a little something about Earl Owensby as well.
Yeah, so there's a guy named Quentin that I think a mutual friend of ours, Chris King, actually used to be a customer of his at the Video Archive store in Hollywood. But Quentin Tarantino, he's at least familiar with Earl Owensby's work, judging from an appearance on Jimmy Kimmel a few years ago. Maybe we can drop that clip in here. But so EO had a famous quote: "Let's get violence off the street and back on the screen where it belongs." Well, Tarantino had a similar philosophy. He said, violence in real life is terrible, but violence in movies can be cool. It's just another color to work with. And you see that throughout Tarantino's entire career, starting out with Reservoir Dogs. Within the first, really for the entire movie, Tim Roth is bleeding out slowly, miserably. You have civilians murdered in that film. You have Michael Madsen cutting a guy's ear off and doing a little dance. So that sets the pace for Tarantino's entire career. And I think probably the most extreme example of violence in his films, you go to the Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. And this really comes to a head in toward the end of Kill Bill Volume 1, the showdown in the House of Blue Leaves. This fight that's called The Bride versus the Crazy 88. And there was such immense blood spatter throughout this entire sequence that portions of the scene had to be in black and white because the MPAA said if it was in full color, it would have earned an NC-17 rating. So you can kind of see the kinship there between Tarantino and Earl Owensby and how they both had their dealings with the MPAA as it relates to the depiction of violence on screen. And then going back, even 30 years prior to that, still in the Hays Code days, but a similar instance with Alfred Hitchcock, the legend. Psycho in 1960, the blood in the famous shower scene. Probably one of the most iconic, cinematic killings of all time. This film was shot in black and white for a variety of reasons, but one of the main reasons was to minimize the vividness of the blood and the gore. So shooting in black and white, they actually used chocolate syrup for the blood there. Fun little fact, which wouldn't have worked if it was in color. Because it was in black and white, they could find a way to do that. And so, yeah, I think it's really, really fascinating how just something as simple as, a film being in color, being in black and white can totally recontextualize how, certain cinematic guidelines look at it.
And speaking of our audience, I do appreciate you guys spending time with us right here on Meet Me at the Movies, this special educational edition where we look at films and filmmakers that have been connected to bands and boycotts and even barricades to their art form. Come right back after this quick intermission. We're going to talk some more violence on screen, and maybe even some political and cultural aspects of filmmaking and how these films and filmmakers all play a part in what we are able to see and what we may not be able to see. And this may be a multi-part series. We'll have to wait and see. So stick around after this quick intermission.
Won't you come and meet me at the movies? Won't you come and watch a flick?
Nikki Bliss Carroll, your host for Cleveland Connections, the show that explores what's happening at Cleveland Community College. Join us as we sit down with members of faculty and staff to discuss programs of study, upcoming events, and other exciting campus news. We'll have a new show for you each month on C19 TV, or you can stream us online at C19.tv. Tune in and connect with Cleveland Community College on Cleveland Connections.
Won't you come and meet me at the movies? Won't you come and watch a
Hello, welcome back to Meet Me at the Movies. Noel T. Manning the second here, hanging out with Thomas Manning, and we are talking about films that have faced challenges over the years, and some would say, censorship in some form or fashion, films or filmmakers that face those bans, those barricades or boycotts. And Thomas, before the break, we talked about some films, talked about the Hays Code, the MPAA. We talked about Earl Owensby, also about Tarantino and Psycho. And we were talking about violence on screen. And in 1974, there was a film, Thomas, that had a lot of violence. And it was also one of those early ones. It was an independent film that's legendary now, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, really one of the most influential horror films of all time when you look at films that made a mark. It was a kind of a gritty documentary style realism with this violence. But again, the MPA, they wanted to give an X rating to the original cut of this. Now, here's what's different about this film and this filmmaker compared to Earl Owensby. So Tobe Hooper decided, okay, I want to recut this film to satisfy the MPAA. So he attempted to cut this film down to secure a PG rating because there was no PG-13 at that time. It didn't happen. Ultimately, the MPAA did settle at an R rating for this. But this film, Thomas, talk about being censored in the U.S. and also internationally. Some theaters refused to screen it, especially in the more conservative regions, religiously conservative regions of the country. A lot of cities, including parts of Canada and the UK, actually outright banned the film from even being shown. The British version of the MPA refused to even give this film any kind of certificate with a label. So eventually it was released in 1999 in the UK, and Australia initially banned it in multiple territories. And that was lifted in the 1980s. And in Germany, Sweden, and Norway, it was heavily censored, and in some areas it was, outright banned. This is a film, Thomas, when you look at it now, it is considered, a film that's legendary. It has really become a case study for later films on film censorship and also artistic freedom. So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I said legendary. So legendary that in 2022, the National Film Registry recognized this as an important cultural artifact and selected it for preservation. So this kind of predates Owensby. It was 74, a couple of years earlier. But the difference here is this filmmaker decided, okay, I'm gonna recut it because I want this to be seen. And so I'm not saying back down to the MPAA, but knew that, hey, I've got to find a way to make this work. Any thoughts, questions on that before we dive into some more filmmakers that have a little bit of violence and maybe religion connected to them?
Yes, a quick note on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I guess part of the reason that movie, was met with such a reaction was how much it kind of felt like a film that was just like a found footage type movie, just like a video camera that someone found, or I guess a film, just a Super 8 reel that someone found of actual real events that were happening. Not that anybody thought that was the case, but I feel like just the way it was presented, that probably had a psychological impact on the way people were perceiving it.
Yeah, and I think this is the film, Thomas, that really sparked that debate that's really kind of ongoing now about violence in cinema, especially when you look at low budget and indie horror films. They truly do take it to the extremes where mainstream may have pulled back just a little bit. So this is the one that I think launched that and changed that for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you teased heading into the more religious commentary section here. A few filmmakers really come to mind. I think Scorsese is probably the number one name when you think of, at least in modern cinema, the intertwinement of religion and the art of cinema. And there was one film that I know you wanted to speak about that Scorsese made back in '88, The Last Temptation of Christ. And this was met with really a worldwide outcry from certain groups.
Absolutely, yeah. This is, Scorsese has always had a deep connection and interest in religion and violence, and you see that within his films. And this film in particular, I remember churches boycotting this before it was even shot. I mean, they heard this was going to be produced, that Universal was deciding to distribute this, and they were already, they were sending these lists around to churches to get people to sign up to protest the making of the film, not the distribution, but the making of it. So before the film was even shot, there were churches and religious organizations saying, we've got to step up. We can't let this movie take place. And the reason they didn't want it to take place is because this was an interpretation of the life of Jesus Christ, but looking at the humanity and the struggles, the temptations faced, especially the last temptation of the humanity aspect of who Christ was. And this, challenged traditional biblical narratives, and because of that, it really caused this backlash. The film was accused of blasphemy, of course, and the Catholic Church, the moral majority, and a lot of evangelical groups really went out of their way to get in front of the media, which what that ended up doing is it ended up making this film even bigger in the spotlight than it would have been. Now, Scorsese was a known figure, but because these religious groups went out there, it really changed the complexion of how this film was going to be perceived. Now, it did get bans and censorships. There were protests. There was picketing, threats against theaters that were showing it. Some theaters decided not to show it because of that reason. Our good friend, Mr. Jeff Powell, actually went to see this at an art house cinema in Charlotte, and he said he remembers there being a police presence there because of that. A lot of other countries, were banning this, and there were religious extremists in France who firebombed a Paris theater, injuring some patrons. And so, this film, controversial without a doubt. I'd say it probably is still one of the most controversial religious films made. And it did eventually, gain this recognition as really a significant work. And there are also a lot of theological scholars now, Thomas, who use this film and the script to explore the human aspects of Christ, what made Christ human. And so it's really an amazing work of artistic expression that challenges us to think and challenged audiences then, and I think it still continues to challenge audiences today. And Thomas, we've only got about 3 minutes, but any final questions or thoughts you want to make sure you ask about that before I'll let you talk about another film that's a bit of a comedy that has some of the same issues?
Oh, well, I just think you can chart Scorsese's entire career, basically his search for God in film, and even up until Killers of the Flower Moon that just came out last year at the time we're recording this. Just all that underlying theme is really in every fiber of the work that he puts on screen. And it has the way he's explored that has upset certain groups sometimes, but he's been entirely authentic to who he is the entire time. And I just think that's why he's a grandmaster of cinema.
Absolutely. Scorsese originally wanted to become a priest before pursuing filmmaking. So religion was a huge part of who he was and is. And many of his films, like Mean Streets, Silence from 2016, they explore these themes of guilt, redemption, and moral conflict. And so it's there. And we could do a whole show just on exploring Martin Scorsese and faith and doubt and his religious aspects of film. Well, Thomas, before we wrap, I'd love for you to talk about Monty Python. Have they got a film that had a little bit of controversy relating to religion?
Yeah, now for something completely different. Monty Python's Life of Brian in 1979. Also a film heavily accused of blasphemy. Various local councils throughout Britain banned the film. Ireland and Norway banned the film for many years. Screenings in the U.S. were picketed by both Jewish and Catholic protesters, so it didn't just offend one specific religion or one specific culture or ethnicity. It offended multiple, kind of across the entire board. And I think one of the main issues that a lot of people had in this film, there's a recurring joke in it about how basically crucifixion actually isn't as bad as it seems. That's this joke that keeps coming back. And, for Christians, the crucifixion is basically, that's the core symbol of their faith. Like there's even a musical number with a group of men on a cross being crucified saying, always look on the bright side of life. So this was a film that stepped on very many toes, but once again, for even upwards of a decade in places like Italy, I believe it was banned. And then over the years, it eventually made its way and is available pretty much worldwide now. But yeah, so this goes to show whether it's something as meditative as The Last Temptation of Christ or something as satirical as The Life of Brian. There are many different ways to explore religion on film and many different ways to potentially upset people.
Absolutely. You have been watching this multi-part segment of Meet Me at the Movies, where we look at films that have films and filmmakers that have faced either bans, boycotts, or barricades within their life and within their art. And here's a kind of a final question, Thomas, I want to send out there, because we are going to come back and do more of these for sure. But do filmmakers have a responsibility to conform to societal norms, or should they remain just completely unrestrained in their storytelling? And where is the line, if there is one? So that's kind of the question. And we started this off with, how would you decide what people should and shouldn't watch, or how do you? I'll still leave that with the audience, and we'll come back and ask that again as well during our next segment. And I'll leave you with a Martin Scorsese quote. He said, "Movies are the memories of our lifetime, and we need to keep them alive." So for all of us right here at Meet Me at the Movies, the entire cast and crew, C19 TV, I'm Noel T. Manning II for Thomas Manning, and for this week, that is a wrap.
Next time we see you, we'll gladly fill you in. We'll tell about the happy and the sad ones. We'll talk about the good ones and the bad ones. Many films to view till we meet again.